Now we turn the page to a new part of the Bible. We're moving into Joshua. So we're moving away from the Pentateuch. So far, we've been hanging out in Genesis through Deuteronomy. We skipped over Numbers. Again, I'm sorry. But now we're in the middle of Joshua, or we're beginning Joshua, rather. So the really exciting thing about Joshua is that that promise to Abraham finally begins to be fulfilled, because the people of God are actually entering into the land of Canaan, that place that they've been trying to get back to now for 440 years. So we're finally coming into the land. Hooray! You should be throwing yourself a party. And as the people of God enter the land, they cross the Jordan. And lo and behold, God does the same thing that God did when the people of God came out of Egypt, and God parts the waters. Again, parting the waters is always for blessing for the people of God, and the waters crashing back down is always a part of the curse. But you can see in this picture, the priests are walking through the waters. They're carrying with them the Ark of the Covenant that's been in the tabernacle for all these years, and they get to go first. And that should tell you something. The priests who minister at the tabernacle get to walk into the land first. It's as if they're walking in to sanctify or make the land holy. So keep that in your head. The very first thing that they have to do when they enter the land is to circumcise the men. For 40 years, the Israelites have been living in the desert and nobody has been circumcised. And circumcision, going all the way back to Abraham, is a sign of the covenant. So in Genesis 17, Yahweh says, this is going to be a mark of the fact that I have a covenant with you, Abraham. You and all of your offspring will be circumcised, meaning that the foreskin of the penis is cut off. And that's a marker for the people of God. Well, while they've been in the desert, they have not been circumcising the new male babies that have been born. And so once they enter the land, the priests go into the land, they have to circumcise themselves as a sign that they are a part of this covenant that God made with Abraham. They have to make themselves holy, make themselves in accordance with what God wants, because they're entering this new place. They also are going to celebrate Passover. Passover, remember, was what happened with the 10th plague right before they left Egypt. And so they're going to commemorate Passover, remember it, and say, look at what God has done. Now God is bringing us into the land. This is all very, very exciting. And it is. And before they begin to wage war on the people who are living in Canaan, Joshua, the new leader, Moses has died, and Joshua is the new leader. He is going to meet with the commander of the army of Yahweh. This is exciting. This tells you that something new is going on. The people of God are going to go into the land of Canaan, and they're going to take it over by combat. But first, Joshua has to meet with the commander of the army of Yahweh. And one of the things that the commander of the army of Yahweh tells him is that the place where he's standing is holy ground. And that should tip you off that we've got something completely new going on here. Excuse me for 1 minute. That we haven't seen this sort of thing yet. The only place that we've seen holy ground is in the tabernacle. And so when the commander of the army of Yahweh says, whoa, hey, you're on holy ground, that should set you off and let you know, oh, this is something different from the desert. This is something new. And so that's what we're dealing with here. Looking into my cup. It's got something weird in the bottom, but I think it's going to be okay. All right, so here we go. Going into the land, y'all. The other thing that has happened, now that we have gone from the Pentateuch to something new in Joshua, we are in another piece of literature altogether. And it is called, get ready for this, the Deuteronomistic history. So when we turn the page from Deuteronomy into Joshua, we're no longer in the Pentateuch, we're in another collection of books called the Deuteronomistic history. So the Deuteronomistic history, is composed of Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings. That is the Deuteronomistic history. Shorthand is Joshua through 2nd Kings. Got it? All of those books are historical, but all of them have several things in common. So they're telling the history of the people of God, and what they're doing, it seems like, is continuing to answer that question of the exile. How did we get here? And we know from reading the law that the reason that the people of God are in exile is because they didn't follow the law. And so the curse came upon them, that bilateral covenant with Moses, that curse came upon them. But we haven't heard the story of them breaking the law yet. We don't know exactly how they did that. And so now we're going to find out. So the Abrahamic covenant tells people in exile that maybe they'll get to go home. It provides hope, right? But the Mosaic covenant gives them a reason for why they're in exile, because they didn't follow the law. And the law that becomes very important, the parts of the law that become very important as the Deuteronomistic history tells the story, there are two things. Only worship Yahweh. Don't worship anyone other than Yahweh. And don't get mixed up with the other nations, because then you might be tempted to worship somebody other than Yahweh. All right, thinking about this stuff. We've got Joshua through 2nd Kings, and this guy, I wonder if I wrote his name down. This is Martin Note. I introduced you to my friend Wellhausen back when we did the Pentateuch. Martin Note is going to deal with the Deuteronomistic history, Joshua through 2nd Kings. And he is going to say that it seems very likely to him that, you read about this in Banstra, but Martin Note is going to say that during the exile, it seems very likely that someone sat down and wrote Joshua through 2nd Kings, the Deuteronomistic history, using sources from before the exile. So for the sake of this class, and that person, whoever wrote it, loved Deuteronomy. Now you remember that Deuteronomy was written before the exile in the 600s under Josiah. And so in the exile, whoever this person is that writes Joshua through 2nd Kings probably has a copy of Deuteronomy and knows the law very well and is thinking about Deuteronomy and the law. And that person, just a minute, who composed Joshua through 2nd Kings while holding on to Deuteronomy and being like, Deuteronomy, I love you so much. That person, for the sake of this class, we are going to refer to them as Hermione, also known as the Deuteronomist. And this is just to give you a face to go along with whoever this hypothetical person is that Martin Note came up with. So Hermione, or the Deuteronomist, is sitting down during the exile, and she says, I'm going to explain how we got into this mess, and I'm going to write down a history of the people and tell us exactly how this happened. And the reason that it happened is because we kept disobeying the law. So she is going to start with Joshua, go all the way through the exile, to the exile in 2nd Kings. So remember, though, that we've already had somebody writing during the exile, and that is the author of the Pentateuch that wove together those 4 sources, J, E, D, and P. And so you can think of that person as a separate person altogether. That person can be Ron Weasley, if you've read the Harry Potter series. So we've got Hermione writing during the exile, and we've got Ron Weasley. So you've now been introduced to this new portion of literature called the Deuteronomistic history that was probably written down during the exile, and it tells the history of the people of God from the time they come into the land with Joshua until the time that they are expelled from the land in the exile. And that was probably written by the Deuteronomist using some material that he or she had at their disposal to create this history. So now you know about the Deuteronomistic history, and you've been introduced to Joshua. We're entering the land now. This is important stuff.